If you're getting this email, it's because you picked solid surface that is directional in nature. And before we get into what directional material is, first we need to talk about how solid surface is laid out and how we pull seams in solid surface. So all the sheets in solid surface predominantly are 30 inches wide by 144 inches long. So anything that is wider than 30 inches or longer than 144 inches will definitely have a seam in it. So one of the big advantages of solid surface is once it is seamed up, you really don't actually see the seams. They're inconspicuous and nobody knows they're there. So if you look at this piece, this is a separate piece. What we would end up doing is putting a two-part epoxy in here, just like we have here. We'd put the epoxy in here, we would clamp these guys together. When the epoxy dries, we then sand down the epoxy like it's been sanded down here, and then you really can't see the seam in the solid surface. It's pretty much inconspicuous. The two-part epoxy kind of works like a chemical weld, where when you weld two pieces of metal together, you got that bead on top of it, and then you grind down that bead, and when you're done polishing out the metal, you can't see the seam. And solid surface is pretty much the same way. So in non-directional material, which this would be an example of, or this piece here, it's more got flakes in it and it's kind of modeled throughout. There's really no direction to the material. Whereas if you come over here, you'll notice that this sheet here has modeling throughout it. It's more of a directional solid surface, meaning that there's a grain or a pattern to it. This one here with the stripes obviously takes directional material to the nth degree. I mean, it doesn't get any more directional than stripes moving through the solid surface. And then if you come over here, we have a countertop that we're actually getting ready to lay out. This is a directional material. If you step back, you'll notice we've got it so all the grain is running this way through the countertop. This is going to be kind of a peninsula that comes over here, and we've laid it out specifically so the grain is all moving the direction of the long length of the countertop. So even though the grain is moving this way on this long part, we don't change the grain and make it run this way on the next part. We will cut it so that the grain is going continuously through it. So even though it's solid surface and we're going to pull this seam right here, and when it's all said and done, you're not going to be able to feel the seam or really notice it, you will be able to see the difference in the grain where the pieces come together in directional material. We try and lay it out to try and get that grain as tight as possible, but if you'll notice as you go down the seam, the length of it, keep in mind this one has not been pulled, we've got it just sort of loose here so that you can see where the seam would be. It blends together pretty good, but you'll notice like up here, you've got some dark grain versus some light grain. Even though that seam's gonna be pulled and you're not gonna be able to feel or really notice the seam, you will be able to see some of the changing in the pattern. Some places are gonna hide a lot better. Other places might be more noticeable. So whenever someone is buying directional material, we like to send this video out just to let them know that, hey, while your seams are gonna be pulled and they're gonna be good, they're still gonna be a non-porous surface where you're not going to have any bacteria building up, you may be able to notice where that seam is at more easily just because the change in the grain color where those pieces come together. So we just like to make sure everybody's aware of that. Some people could care less. Other people are more, they want to not hardly see anything because they're used to the solid surface. It's more of a non-directional like this. And so we know it does bother some people, so we like to point that out. Just because you can see the difference in the grain where the seam comes together does not mean that it is a bad fabrication or a bad install. It's just the nature of directional material. So one way that you can kind of see how this all works is if you come over here to this bathroom vanity sink. This is an integral sink that is hard seamed on. If the seam is pulled here, there's no caulk line there. It is the sink is basically chemically welded with the adhesive onto the deck. But since the sink is a bright white and this is a sheet of a different color, even though that seam, you can't feel it, you don't even know it's there, you can see that it's there because of the white and the different color of the countertop. So your seam is still great. It's done correctly. There's no issues with it. We just like everybody to know that with directional material, you might be able to notice the seam a lot more easily than if you were going with a non-directional color. Again, nothing wrong with it. We just like to make sure everybody is 100% aware of what the characteristics are of the material they are buying. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. We'd love to answer any questions you might have. Thanks again.